Hi there. I hope you had a great week. So I promised last week that I would continue the story of my spiritual awakening journey. And this is, I guess, the magical half, I would say, after a devastating year of sadness and grief from the passing of Kent, who I had mentioned in my previous video. So where I left you off last time was he had passed away, and I was now journeying on my own, trying to figure out why I had met this man and he was taken away after only a couple of months of knowing him. And so anyway, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share a bit of the magical part with you. Now, for those of you who may have had either your awakening sparked or your dark night of the soul sparked, I guess more or less, by someone you cared for passing away, you're probably going to be able to relate to this. For those of you who had it sparked in another manner, it might seem fantastical to you, but then during the spiritual awakening journey, everything opens up to us so we can start to understand all of the more mystical, magical things that we have not been privy to in this human life for the most part. And I guess I call it magical mystical because it really is, and it's so powerful when these things happen to us with these signs and messages. But you know, our loved ones who have passed on can speak to us. And this is the part of the journey I want to speak to you about, as well as the signs and messages I started seeing over the course of the next, what would be turned out to be 2.5 years up to this point. I have gone through a warp speed awakening. I have received multiple signs and messages each day that I have actually documented, and I'm going to share that with you and some samples of some of those signs and messages. So let's start in where I left off with, having heard that Kent passed away. And of course, I did not know his family. I knew no one. So basically that was done and said, and there I was. And left with nobody to talk to even about him, which is fascinating to think about, and how lonely I actually felt during that period of time, particularly during the first month. All right, so I will share with you pieces of this, and then you're going to get the gist of this. And again, someday I hope to write a book about all this, so you can read that when it comes out. But the first thing that happened after he passed away is I had a friend come visit. It was really about a week afterwards. One of my best friends came to visit me. And as we can so often hear, our loved ones who have passed on can leave us signs and messages, but we're not conscious, and we're in too much grief. Typically, that's it. We're in too much grief, so we can't see that. And then we start living our life again, and we move on, and we often don't see those signs. But what happened that day when my friend came to visit, and it was that weekend after, was I was preparing coffee for breakfast, and suddenly none of the banks of outlets worked in my kitchen. So I couldn't do anything with make my coffee, nothing. I kept moving around the coffee, or the grinder, and none of the outlets worked. And pretty soon, as we were talking about this, the lights in my living room went off. They blinked and went off. All this happened in the span of less than 5 minutes. And she says to me, "Do you think that's Kent?" And I kind of laughed, and we laughed, but it stuck with me. And I just remember it's so odd. And then suddenly everything worked again. The lights stopped blinking. And it was like I knew there was a sign, but I wasn't consciously aware of it. I was still in that grief state. And again, it was only a week afterwards. And like I said, and those of you who have had a loved one pass away, you're in this space of just trying to deal with this and comprehend it. And that is often when our loved ones in spirit cannot communicate with us, because it's a wall of grief that we have put up, and we are very difficult to get to. Well, over that next month, I moved so fast from a state, and all by myself, by the way, from a state of grief to a state of joy. And how this began to happen was I received dramatic signs and messages from Kent very clearly, And then as I started realizing it, I was starting to receive signs and messages from a greater, or I don't want to say a greater presence, but angels and guides. But Kent was ever present in my life. And again, as I talk about this, I feel like this sounds so fantastical, but it's totally real. And I have 170 pages of documented information about the signs and messages that I received. I started journaling immediately. I also started meditating immediately. And I do believe this allowed me to calm myself and move me out of my grief state faster, the meditation component of that. And I'm also one to be, I knew he was there. I guess I would say after the first couple weeks, I knew he was still there, but I was still in grief. But somehow the signs were coming through. I was starting to connect the fact that he had not left my side and that there was a very powerful relationship with us that I still didn't understand. So that said, I started documenting. I journaled every day. I wrote down all the things I saw, all the things I noticed. I wasn't forcing anything. They were just in my face. And so what I did over time, and this is going to not look right to you as I show you this because I can't figure out how to turn my computer around so you can actually read it because it's flipped, the screen's flipped. But I took this whole room that you see that I'm in, and as you can see here, these are those big, huge 3M sticky sheets, all right? And I know you can't read this very well, but this one is methods of communication. I took my journal entries, all right? And I'll just read some of them to you. I took my journal entries eventually, and I took this whole room that you see here, which was not in an office format before that, and I put these 3M stickies up all over the wall. And I took from my journal and categorized them. And this one here, this sheet, and I had 15 of these sheets for probably 9 months in this office that is now an office. And I charted out all my signs and messages in a flowchart form in a way, and I categorized them as to how they actually showed up in my life. And this was my journey forward. So I'm going to stop there real quick because I'm going to move on and actually give you some examples of the signs and messages and show you some things. But I would highly recommend that as you go through this journey, and you can start anytime you want, even if you're further into your journey, because we still get signs and messages, but I started immediately. And for those of you who are new to the spiritual awakening journey, start journaling now. I would also chart these because they're going to guide you through your journey if you listen and if you are insightful enough. But it's enough to be able to write these down and then eventually go back and categorize them. So what I did was in this chart, I could talk all day about this part, by the way, and I will try to stop, but methods of communication, for example, I have a numbers category, and I literally put down every time I had a number show up. And then I started realizing what numbers were showing up and why, what were more important than others in that particular time frame, what they meant. And so I made a complete study of this, all right? This was my full-time job because I had actually quit my job during the time Kent was ill. So I had a complete blank slate, all right? This is where I was headed into my spiritual awakening journey, complete blank slate. Not working, and decided I was going to live off my savings for a while and see what would happen. So that's what happened to me here. And this sheet that I had in front of you that you probably couldn't read very well was all about numbers, but there were two more just on numbers. And what I did was the numbers and what they were associated with at that time, and I wrote that down. I would highly recommend get yourself some stickies, create what I did. You're going to be amazed at what you find. So that is something I would recommend. And so to share a little bit with you how I moved through my journey after he passed away was I busied myself with knowing I was being communicated with. It didn't take me long to figure that out. I was being communicated with. And even if you haven't had someone pass away in your life, we're being communicated with the angels as you go through your spiritual awakening. It is clear you will receive signs and messages. All right? You will. It's just whether we're able to pick up on it or not. And as you move forward in the journey, you're going to start being able to be more open to that. And I don't know how that happens, but it does. So don't let this intimidate you that I have 170 pages of messages and signs. I mean, you might have just a couple, and you may choose not to do this at all, but I want you to know it is possible. So with that, I then journeyed through a grief support group for about a month or so, but I realized, and this is an interesting study, that a lot of people never move out of the grief state. Now, I moved out in a warp speed fashion, but I believe it was all designed for me in the way that I needed to move out of it. But I stayed there long enough, I think, to maybe help some people see some positive things that might come out of this for them. And then I realized I was moving into a joy state pretty quickly because I was seeing that Kent was still here. So from there, I journeyed on my own, pretty much discovering and spending time learning about this realm. And James Van Prague's books were the first books I picked up because I started talking about grief. And then that's when I was introduced to this spirituality realm. And he really was the one who brought, because he's a medium, and so that's the part of the journey I was on to get me through or get me on my spiritual awakening path. And from there, I started attending some conferences and just learning. It was the learning phase I was in, incessant learning. But during this time, the signs and messages kept coming, and I could feel myself feeling joy opening up in my heart. Because remember, I had had my dark night of the soul in January of 2016. Well, that cracks you wide open, but you're not going to quite understand it yet. You're just going to be going through that traumatic state. And then you're open, and all of a sudden this information starts coming into you, and it's like your soul starts guiding you into that understanding, all right, that greater awareness. And as I made my move through that summer, I was just incessantly learning, which I know so many of us go through that stage, and putting my signs and message together. So to finish, so basically what's happened from there, I have made my journey all the way to this point, continued on the journey, and my gifts, my intuitive gifts have skyrocketed off the charts. Again, I attribute a lot of this to meditation, but I am now, I'm very, very clairaudient. For most of you will know that because I channel angels. And I also am a medium. I have those abilities. I don't use it that often, but, and I guess maybe I will in my future work. I am also very clairsentient, I feel, and I'm also very clairvoyant, which I have chosen right now to use the clairaudient component most in what I'm doing and of sharing with you in the YouTube videos with my channeling of the Light Keepers, and then also on my Facebook page that you guys are probably aware of. But anyway, my point is these gifts started just rolling in, and I took full advantage of them because I just let them come, and then I practiced and I listened and I moved forward. So your journeys are all going to be very individual, but I wanted to share that with you because you're going to get signs and messages too. And I thought I would share now with you 3 of the cooler ones. And, I still sit here and go, wow, how is that possible? Because it's just crazy. So in my very early stage, the first week and a half of my journey, I was in terrible grief state. And this is what popped me out of it immediately because I knew something was up. So Kent was a musician. He was a guitarist and pianist, and he also sang. And so he had his guitars galore in my house when he stayed with me. And I remember helping clean out his house, which is another story, but I ended up actually helping clean out. I had hoped for one thing that I could keep of his, because all his stuff had been in my house, but it all got moved out as well after he passed away. I gave everything back. I didn't keep any memento, nothing, because I just didn't feel it was right. I never even thought about it. And then I remember cleaning out the house, helping, and saying, I just wanted a guitar pick. I just wanted a guitar pick. I would frame it and keep it to remind me of him. And so I got handed a guitar pick by actually family that I eventually ended up meeting kind of peripherally. And they handed me a guitar pick, and I thought that was neat and everything. But I didn't really think more of it, and I hadn't really made me feel a whole lot better for whatever reason. And, I hadn't received any signs or messages, and not that I was looking for them because I didn't even know that would be possible. But one day I was getting ready for tennis. I'm a big tennis player, and so I was still doing a lot of that because that was helping me through this. And I walked to my bedroom, and my bed is here, and say my dresser's here. Literally, there's 2 steps to go get socks. So I was facing my bed, turned to go get my socks, picked my socks up. I remember having one in each hand. And for whatever reason, I was gripping onto them tightly. And I had walked into the bedroom and sat down. I have a white carpet too, and so, it was pretty clear of what was on the floor at the time. I go to pick up the socks. I come back, and I look down as I sit down on my bed, because I had flipped around, and there is this exact guitar pick in front of my feet, in between my feet, that had not been there literally moments before. This guitar pick changed everything for me. I looked down at my feet, in between my feet, there it was. It had not been on my white carpet that I had just been looking at 2 seconds before. This appeared. It's called an apport, if any of you know anything about that. I didn't. I just looked up objects appearing from deceased loved ones, and they're called apports. And it's a very powerful way for them to send a message to us, and it's apparently difficult to do. It takes a lot of energy. And this actually appeared for me. Everything changed. I remember getting goosebumps. I just shifted, and it was my first notation as well. I think I did actually note that the bank of lights went off, but this was the big one that shifted everything. The next day, I'm sharing 3 with you. I told you I'd do that. So the next day, within 2 days, I had been doing some laundry at a laundromat, doing some bigger quilts and things. And I had, it was winter and still kind of wintry, and I had worn a scarf that I absolutely loved that Kent had gotten me. And it was very special to me. Anyway, I'd gone to the laundromat, come back, and been kind of tossing some things out from the house that I had actually been helping clean out. So my car had been full of things that I was saving and helping the family with, and then ultimately getting rid of. And I was doing most of that work. Anyway, needless to say, I'd tossed my scarf in the back of my vehicle, and I was still just frenzied. This is just a few weeks after he had passed away. And I was involved in this, and it was very cathartic, but at the same time, still I was frenzied. And what I realized that next day is somehow I had tossed out that scarf he got me as one of the only things I had from him, given we had such a short time together. I had tossed it all out with the things we were throwing away. And so, as you might imagine, I was devastated. I'm sobbing and crying, and it was just a horrible thing. And not what I needed. The next morning I wake up. I walk into my bathroom, which is very tiny, do my morning routine, and the floor is very clear. I know if there's anything on it at all, there's nothing, right? So I walk over the threshold. I come back from getting a towel. I walk over that threshold again, literally within a few seconds. All of a sudden, in front of me coming back, I hope you can see this and you can't read it, but it's a pashmina scarf label. It's the exact, I only have one of these scarves. It's the pashmina scarf label from the scarf that I would have lost. And it's as though he was able to, and I go, this kind of sounds fantastical, but, anything can happen in this awakening. So this scarf label that you see here, that is so special to me, which was from my scarf, because I don't have another scarf like this, was on my bathroom floor, literally within seconds of me turning around to do something else similar to the guitar pick situation. The scarf label's there for me to see. Now, I started realizing, oh my gosh, he's trying to tell me that he's here and that we can communicate. That was my first sign. I was supposed to understand, Carolyn, we can communicate. You need to understand this. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here. You just can't see me. I'm trying to prove to you, we can communicate. Well, long story short, I became clairaudient, so I speak with him regularly, and that's a fascinating story in itself. But that was the point, and that was the learning I'm supposed to get. So we need to really listen to these messages and signs that we receive and be able to hopefully translate them in some way. So mine have been very, very powerful messages. And these kinds of messages have come in spades. Again, that's another apport, okay? Another object showing up from our departed loved ones. And those of you who, like I said, have not had a departed loved one spark your awakening, you're still going to get signs and messages because they're going to show up in other ways. Now I'm going to show you something else here that just blew me away. I was getting ready to leave on a long vacation. Oh, actually, it was my first conference and have anything to do with the spiritual realm at all. I went to James Van Prague's conference out in Encinitas, California, literally a month after Kent passed away. I would never have done anything like this before, but I was driven to go. And the day I was getting ready to leave, I actually live on my second story, okay? It's a split foyer, but needless to say, I live in my second story. And I have a very large garden, all right? And I'm telling you this for a reason. So and I have white carpet, all right? So as I was getting ready to leave and pack up my bags, I look down on the floor and I see this wood bark chip. And I'm like, I've never had a piece of my garden, my wood bark inside my house up in the second level. And I'm thinking to myself, that has never happened. How in the world did this get in here? Well, as I looked down, this is now framed. I hope to heck you can see this. This is a little bird, right? Okay? I'm going to back it up. I hope you can see this. It's like a little bird. And I saw this piece of wood bark that I thought, how did this get here? And it's in the shape of a bird, and it's very delicate. Well, how many wood bark chips can you find that look exactly like a small dove? All right? A small dove. Well, I started receiving dove signs like you would not believe. It's been one of my primary messages, whether it be dove feathers, anything to do with dove, all right? This started telling me that my angels were talking to me, okay? So the signs and messages became prolific. And again, I hope you could see those and understand that this is part of the journey. It's the magical part of the journey where you start receiving signs and messages. And from there, I moved through an absolute warp speed awakening that I'm not even sure I can define properly for you to this day, where I now am where I am today with an extremely strong clairaudient gift, where I channel regularly, as you know. I also have had a healing modality literally show up in my lap, which is a whole nother conversation. And it's part of what I do now, and which I'll end up sharing more with you at a future date. But really wanted you to understand my journey, and that there's probably not anything I wouldn't understand that you've gone through, given my powerful warp speed 2.5-year awakening, where I now am clearly speaking with my higher self. I'm still going through journeys and learnings, because we never stop, but I feel I'm at a really powerful place of understanding this awakening process, and want to help you along your journey as much as I can, and sharing my stories, my learnings as we go along, sharing insights that I have, sharing messages that I'm receiving as well from our divine guidance, and all here to help you forward in your journey. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick, very short summary of an extremely powerful last 2.5 years in particular, since my dark night of the soul. So next week you'll move into seeing more about some of the things that I'm going to be sharing on a weekly basis, and I hope you'll continue to join me on this journey, and I so appreciate getting to know you. Thank you.